Hi, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Conversations number 11. We're going to be talking about cat qubits today, and we have a speaker from Alice and Bob. I will introduce Sebastian in a bit. Actually, we'll go around and ask everyone to introduce themselves, as we always do. So if you're familiar with our last sessions, this is more of a discussion than a speaker series. We just come together and talk about stuff we like, which is quantum computing. And we usually have a focus. Today, our focus will be fault-tolerant quantum computing, and more specifically cat qubits, which is what Alice and Bob is working on. This is a company out of Paris, France. And so I think Sebastian can talk more about that. But before we do that, let's go around and I'll ask everyone to, like, if they're comfortable, turn the video on. And if they don't have the video on, just say a few sentences about themselves, at least like their name, where they are right now in the world, because we are all around the world right now due to our current situation, and why they are interested in quantum conversations, or why they're interested in quantum computing, or I mean, what was the reason they came to the session? So I'll go ahead and I'll start. I'm Mart. I'm managing Quantum Conversations, which is in partnership with Stanford Quantum Computing Association. And Alexei Cabro, who's also here, started this series. I was how I met Alexei was through Stanford. I was leading the partnerships at Stanford Quantum Computing Association. So I was part of that during my undergrad and master's doing Stanford. I graduated this winter, and I've been working in the industry, actually focusing on quantum computing research for finance ever since. I am located in New York, and well, I'm interested, as I said, I'm interested in the financial applications of quantum computing. But how I got interested in quantum computing was through a philosophy of physics class during my freshman year at Stanford. So Sebastian, do you want to introduce yourself and talk a bit about Alice and Bob, and then we'll go around just before you start to talk. Thank you.
Sure. So yeah, I'm Sébastien Gézouin, and so I'm like, I had let's say a regular career in academic world in quantum physics. I did my PhD in 2014. It was about quantum circuits, electronic quantum circuits. Then I moved to superconducting circuits. So I did 2 postdocs, like the regular trajectory. I did one in Paris and one in Sherbrooke in Canada. And last year I joined Alice and Bob when this startup was starting. And indeed, so Alice and Bob is 1 year and a half ago, and it's located in Paris. And our mission is really to build a universal fault-tolerant quantum computer. And as you will see, we use a superconducting qubit technology. But unlike other players who use a trans1, we use a very special kind of qubit, which is a Schrödinger cat qubit that was invented by our co-founders and academic partners. And so my talk today will be mostly to introduce Schrödinger cat qubit to you, what it is, how we can make them, and how we can make a quantum computer out of them.
Amazing. Yeah, thank you. Alexei, you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Yes, hello everybody. So my name is Alexei Kravarov. I'm the founder of Quantum Conversations. I started it last year, and we started partnering with Stanford Quantum right then. And it was a community partnership with IBM. And since then, in January, I joined IBM. So basically, we made this, completely community driven. At IBM, I started as technical, like a system development lead for quantum. And I'm a big data open source guy. I run meetups and a conference in San Francisco Bay Area called Scale by the Bay. The next one actually is in October 28 and 29 online. So I'll share this information. It's an amazing conference in traditional space, right? And so recently, actually, my mandate expanded a bit. So I will be working on accelerated discovery team, which is related to quantum and IBM research, which basically is quantum AI and high performance computing, kind of bringing them to bear on complex problems such as pharma discovery, new materials, large models for AI and stuff like that. So, I think like quantum is one of the tools in our arsenal. And I just have a funny story to share how we found Sebastian. So we did a quantum event in Quebec. And obviously it was very interesting because we had to, I think we assembled the very first stellar French-speaking meetup in quantum. And so obviously we started, we kind of wanted to expand it to global scope, and I learned very interesting facts about French ecosystem. For instance, I met colleagues from Switzerland, and I realized there is a lot of companies, French-speaking folks like Adi Quantique and Alison Bob, and obviously, there is this whole world, right, where like Swiss French people are watching Quebecois TV because they're all outside of France and stuff like that. So I think it's really good for us all has been to find, like English is global language, but really we should be really cognizant of the fact that there are many places people speak the language at work. And so, Sebastian also has a connection to Sherbrooke, so we're very happy to invite him to that event, and obviously we're very happy that he can share it with a global audience. So that's how it all happened, and the world is a small one. So looking forward to the talk in English. I can actually understand.
I will speak English, don't worry.
Thank you.
Great. Yeah, I mean, it's great to see that like there's a lot of stuff happening all around the world. So it's amazing to be a part of that. Abhiskar, who was also here last time. Hey, Abhiskar, how are you?
Hi, Maud. I'm good. And you?
Good, thanks. Yeah, do you want to briefly introduce yourself?
Okay, I'm Abhiskar and I'm from Nepal. I recently graduated from high school and I'm working as like project head at One Quantum Nepal. And actually it's like chapter of One Quantum Global. And yeah, that's all. See, like I'm happy to see you all.
Amazing. Yeah, One Quantum is also another organization. It was started by Denise Ruffner and Andre Koenig, and they have also branches all around the world. Oh, we have an intro from someone that I'm going to read my intro for everybody. This was directly messaged to me from AB. Unfortunately, due to low bandwidth, I need to keep my webcam and mic switched off. System phase, please call me Avi. My formal background is in biomedicine and financial analysis, but I also have an interest in quantum computing and have taken courses in the area in Helsinki, Finland. Wow, where I happen to be right now. It is 7:40 in the evening here now, cloudy, rainy, and getting closer to Helsinki. All right. Okay. Aman Papa.
Hey, I am currently in India pursuing my bachelor's in computer science, and actually in my 4th year. How I started quantum in this field was about 1 year ago through IBM Qiskit Summer School, Global Summer School. There was like 7,000 participants, and why I'm interested in this conversation, because I like the name of the talk, Alice and Wolves, and that's why I joined this.
Perfect. All right, thanks, Aman. Beatrice, who is also with me at Stanford Quantum Computing Association. Are you around, Beatrice? I think I had the screenshots of the participants. Maybe she disconnected. Yeah, I don't see her here right now. Okay, let's go to Brent Lunsford.
Hi, thank you. This is my second time joining this meeting.
Hello again.
I'm calling in from Austin, Texas. So I graduated with degrees in chemistry, including graduate degree. And when I got into my graduate program, it was all quantum. And I kind of came away from that with the understanding that many things in our life are quantum. And most people go through life and we don't realize how much quantum is really, in our bodies, in reactions and things that happen within computers. And I feel like we're going to bridge that gap with something more simple than we think it I do want to mention, I started my career at a research consortium started by the United States government called the Microelectronic and Computer Technology Corporation. And that was started in 1984. I'm not that old. I joined in 1995, spent 6 years there working to advance artificial intelligence and some levels of quantum computing, neural networks, things like that. I'm also a founding officer of the IEEE San Francisco Bay Area MEMS and Sensors chapter. Started the second chapter in Austin, and very involved with groups like this, and happy to join. Glad to see all the people from all over the world and all over the country.
Thanks, Brent. Yeah, exactly. I share the same feelings. Dan Mill.
Hi, everybody. Sorry, it's actually Dan Mills. I mistyped, but it's good to see you all. Yeah, nice to meet you. Calling in from London. I work for Cambridge Quantum as a research scientist there. My interests at the moment are primarily in error mitigation, error correction. I spoke about that at one of the earlier quantum conversations, so it's good to be back. Yeah, I also have a bit of an interest in the French quantum ecosystem. My supervisor was based at Paris 7, although I myself did my PhD in Edinburgh. Yeah, so it's great to be here and good to meet you all.
Yeah, thank you, Dan. Yeah, Dan was one of our speakers from CQC, so it's really nice to see you again. I guess I wasn't there at the time. I wasn't managing, but yeah, great to see you again. Dr. Madhava Swami. Sorry if I'm butchering your names, by the way. I'm trying my best. Okay, Dr. Swami, I guess, is not available right now. Helen He, I think you had your video open. Yeah. Hello.
Hi guys. Yeah, I'm Helen He, and I'm currently a rising junior at Stanford studying human-computer interaction, and I've always been curious about quantum computing, so I thought I'd hop in today and listen.
Perfect. Are you around campus right now? Are you in Palo Alto?
I'm actually at my home in Austin, Texas, so hi Brent.
Yeah, okay, cool. I'm glad to hear that Stanford is opening up in fall, so I guess you'll be back on campus in a bit.
Indeed.
Hitesh, am I saying it right? Hitesh? Okay. John Candelera, who's a lecturer at Stanford, which we work closely with. John, are you around?
Yes, hi.
Hi.
As Mert was saying, I work at Stanford. I manage the System X affiliates program, but I've also been very active in this quantum space for the last couple of years. Last year, I was working with the QEDC consortium as the chair of their workforce development committee. So that's, I think, how I met Mert there, and also through the Stanford Quantum Association. So again, continuing my interest in all things quantum, and I'm anxious to hear the talk today.
All right, thanks for joining, John. Yeah, John was hosting the System X series, which hosted so many speakers from the industry. It's not really focused on quantum computing, but there was so much interest in quantum computing at Stanford due to John. I really wanted to appreciate that. June Power.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Hi, I'm kind of a generalist. I'm interested in this just to keep up with things. My undergraduate work was computer science with physics and math, and my graduate work was distributed systems and AI, but I've never been able to shake physics out. And I really enjoy the Stanford Quantum Association, and I attend one quantum events. And I just find this very enriching. So I'm just here to learn and listen, and I'm just very grateful to be involved. So thank you.
Thank you. All right. Kiran? You're on mute.
Audible?
Yeah.
Hello.
Now we're here.
Yeah. So hi everyone. So I've been associated with Quantum Conversations for probably a couple of months, and I've been introduced to quantum computing using like over the difference or the advantage that we have over classical computing, and that way I try to like go into quantum computing. And thanks to Mert and Alexi, like I've come to Quantum Conversations and really have a nice association actually. And probably this is a platform where we can learn more. So that's what. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for coming again. Krishna.
I just finished, I just graduated undergrad. I'm in New York City. I'm from the Bay Area, and this summer I'm working at a summer internship with Javad Shabani's research group at NYU. I'm working on a team with like some Gatemon qubits.
Nice. All right. Mohammed Heidi.
Hadidi. Hello.
Hello.
Yeah, so hi, my name is Mohammed Hadidi. I got my PhD from Stanford in electrical engineering long time ago in 1983. I retired in 2016. And I'm interested in all things quantum, and I'm just very curious about the latest development in the field. Thank you.
Perfect. Nice to see you here. Thanks for coming. Oded Wertheim.
Hi, everybody. I'm Oded. It's my first time joining. I'm based in Israel. My background is in electrical engineering and mostly in communication. And I was always passionate on physics and quantum computing in particular ever since my undergrad. And now I'm fortunate enough to be with quantum machines working on the next generation quantum control. Thanks.
Thank you, Oded. Great. Yeah, we're all around the world. So nice to hear these things. Pierre Gulmin. Okay. Ravi Minhas.
Hi there, I'm Ravi from Toronto, Canada, possibly another Canadian. I'm not bilingual, let you know. I had the benefit of the French side of Canada. And I worked in QC a long time back, way back in my grad school days, worked in quantum complexity in the beginning times, and also worked in quantum algorithms, ERDFT, and got back into the field, work in error correction and new hardwares. Look at issues, operating systems, operating environments, possibly for QCs. If anybody's interested, could have a chat. Thank you.
Thank you. Siddharth Luru.
Yeah, hi. I've attended some of the earlier quantum conversations, like some of the first few sessions. So I think you guys, I think you guys got a real great thing going, and it's pretty awesome. I'm a rising sophomore in Berkeley, part of the quantum club there, and just being around quantum computing is super cool. And I'm just here and I'm excited to listen to what Sebastian has to say and what Alice and Bob are doing.
Right. Thank you. Alice Smirnova.
Hello. I'm a high school student and I'm just curious about quantum computing.
Okay, great. Thanks for coming. We usually have a few high school students around as well. Ellen Zhang.
Hi, I'm also a high school student, and yeah, I'm also just interested in quantum computing.
Okay, thank you. And Veso. Veso is also usually a participant in our series.
Yes. Hi, nice to meet you again. So I'm a quantum computing mentor for Quantum Open Source Foundation and QWorld. And my background is physics, and now I'm enjoying the opportunity to turn my knowledge in quantum physics into something that eventually may have applicability for quantum computing and for businesses. Thank you for giving me this opportunity to learn a little bit for everyone around and also to hear the new interesting developments. Thanks.
Thanks, Veso. Beatrice, I think you reconnected. If your connection is stable, maybe you can say a few things about you and Stanford Quantum Computing Association.
Hi, yeah, so I'm Beatrice. I just graduated from Stanford, where I was a member of the Quantum Computing Association with MERT, and I was also in this technologies partnerships committee, which I really enjoyed. So I just graduated and I'm taking a gap year working at Rigetti right now, and I'm excited to hear about Alice and Bob's work. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Beatrice. Yeah, I think, did I miss anyone? If I did, can you please like chime in and maybe do the intro? If not, I think oh, hi, Rupesh. Hello.
Yes, so hello there. It's my first time here, so I saw Lexi's LinkedIn post. So I work for the UK Quantum Computing Simulation Hub, and normally I'm based in Oxford Physics, where my role is to develop and nurture the UK quantum computing ecosystem. I'm actually calling you from Mendoza, Argentina. It's a long story. I'm here for personal reasons, but I've also have some news to share. I've recently accepted becoming president of One Quantum Argentina to try and build a community here. So I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
All right, amazing. Thank you, Rupesh. Yeah, I guess we're done with the intros. As you can see, we have a huge spectrum of people interested in quantum computing and doing very different things. And now we can go ahead with our talk. As Sebastian also introduced himself, just as a recap, he's the Chief Experimental Officer at Alice and Bob. He worked on quantum circuits and quantum limited amplifiers before for his PhD and postdoc. And we're going to focus on cat qubits today. All right, you can go ahead.
Let me share my screen. Right. Let me just. Yeah, okay, so indeed, I'm going to give you an introduction to cat qubits today. And as you said, Mert, the spectrum of people here is very broad. So please, if you think I'm going too fast or too slow, don't hesitate to interrupt me and ask your questions. Okay, and to start with a small timeline. So as you know, quantum mechanics was invented during the 20s, but it's only several decades later that the first applications, which are coined under the term first quantum revolution, those applications appeared. So it includes transistor, laser, or LED, so applications that really change our economy and even society. But it's interesting to notice that actually those applications were really exploiting only a subset of the quantum phenomena. So basically for those applications, quantum mechanics was mostly useful at the level of single particle, especially to calculate their energy spectrum. But the most exotic quantum phenomena, which are entanglement and quantum superposition, was not really necessary for those applications. And it's only during the last decade that applications like quantum computing using those exotic phenomena started to become a reality. And the reason why it needed so long before we can exploit entanglement and superposition is because those phenomena are extremely fragile. And this is well highlighted by the famous thought experiment of the Schrödinger cat. So let me recap it quickly because I will talk about Schrödinger cat a lot today. So in this thought experiment, you have a box, and in this box you enclose a cat, and together with the cat you put a mechanism where the release, which is such as the release of some poison, is triggered by the spontaneous decay of an atomic atom. So your cat can have two states if you simplify things. Either it's dead or alive. And the really the striking thing of this SOCT experiment is that since the atomic atom is in a superposition, quantum superposition of being decayed or not, it means, thanks to the mechanism, that the cat is also in a quantum superposition of dead and alive state. It is really both of them at the same time, and you cannot tell in which state it is before someone opens the box, and in this case, you will project the state of the cat toward the dead or alive state. And so this is the SOCT experiment, but of course it does not work like that in the real life. And the reason is the phenomenon of decoherence that will actually extremely fast destroy the quantum superposition. And fundamentally, the reason of this decoherence is that the observer that opens the box is not only the physicist making the experiment, but actually all the environment of the cat, so that is all the universe, is potentially an observer. So it means that if there is even the smallest hole in the box and even a single photon escape of the box, and if the state of this photon is measured by anything in the universe, then the quantum superposition will be destroyed. Same thing happens if the cat emits some sound. If the sound wave goes out of the box and anything in the universe measures this sound wave, then the quantum superposition will be destroyed. It can also be a vibration, for instance, when the cat dies. If it falls in the box, it will emit some vibrations that will be measured by something in the universe, and that will kill the quantum superposition. And so all this is a SOCT experiment, but actually it has a really important practical consequence, because for a quantum computer, the fact that quantum superposition are very fragile means that your quantum computer will make errors. And it's extremely striking if you put numbers. So if you compare it, a quantum computer to a classical computer. So for instance, if you take a RAM memory, which is, as you know, in any classical computer, you will see that such a memory will make some error, but it's really negligible. Actually, it's only a few errors per day. If you want to be more precise, the error rate per operation on a bit of this RAM memory is of the order of 10 to the minus 25. And so if you have a RAM memory with 16 gigabytes of information, you will not make, you will make in average an error after 10 to the 13 operation. So it's completely negligible, and in practice, classical computers even don't correct for those errors. We just live with them. Now, if you take a quantum computer like the Sycamore experiment of Google, it's completely different, because the error rate per operation is the order of 10 to the minus 3. And so it means that if you do only 20 operations on a 50 qubit chip, you will immediately get an error. So of course, it's not very useful when it works, when you make so many errors. So the usual strategy that people do is to try to isolate as much as possible their quantum computer from the environment, so that they would lower the error rate. So I can give a few examples. For instance, a striking example is the case of a nuclear spin qubit. So here the qubit is hosted by a nuclear spin in a very clean material, and nuclear spin basically they interact with almost nothing except other nuclear spin. And in this case, people can make a qubit having lifetime of a few seconds. But obviously, if the nuclear spin does not couple well to the outside world, it's also difficult to control it. And it's a general trade-off. For instance, in the case of trapped ions, the qubit is hosted by a single ion which is in vacuum. So I guess here you cannot make something more isolated than that. And indeed, trapped ions can have an extremely long lifetime. But again, they are very difficult to control. And so the approach we use, well, actually, I could even say that the case of transparent qubit, it's a bit the same problem. Of course, the qubit is a solid state device, so it's hard to imagine that it's isolated from the outside world, because it's on it's a really, there are billions of atoms in this device, it's on a chip and so on. But all the engineering that people are doing by putting filters in the line that control the qubit and so on are there to effectively decouple the transpond from its environment. And but the approach that we use in Alice and Bob with Schrödinger cat qubit is actually not to try to decouple as much as possible the qubit from the environment, but as I will show you, our way to do things is rather to engineer a special kind of interaction in between the qubit and its environment, so that the environment will actually help to stabilize the qubit. And so now I'm going to show you how this works. But first, I'd like to reassure you, we are not making cat qubits with actual cat. And we are not killing cat every day in the lab. We are doing a cat qubit with a quantum harmonic oscillator. So maybe I can explain you what is a Schrödinger cat in a quantum harmonic oscillator. So really the striking feature of the thought experiment of Schrödinger is not the fact that there is a cat that is dead and alive. It's more that you have a classical system and you have a quantum superposition of two classical states. So if you take, for instance, a pendulum, which is a kind of harmonic oscillator, its classical states are simply oscillations of the pendulum, which will be described by some amplitude and some phase. So you can represent an oscillation in phase space by a point. And so if you associate a complex number with this point, the magnitude of the complex number describes the amplitude of the oscillation, and the phase of the complex number is the phase of the oscillation. So that would be a classical state for an harmonic oscillator. Now there is just one subtlety. So as you know, quantum mechanics has the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and this principle, in the case of a pendulum, forbid the phase and the magnitude to be defined perfectly at the same time. And so, the state of the pendulum is not described by a single point, but actually it's blurred and it's described by a Gaussian distribution, which takes into account the quantum fluctuations of vacuum. But anyway, if you do the quantum mechanics of the quantum harmonic oscillator, you will find that there are truly a quantum state, which are called the coherent state, and which up to the quantum, the 0-point fluctuation, correspond exactly to the classical state of the pendulum. And so a Schrödinger cat, in the case of an harmonic oscillator, is a quantum superposition of two coherent states. So for instance, the state could be state alpha and a state where the pendulum has an opposite phase, minus alpha. And in this case, you make a Schrödinger cat by doing a superposition, for instance, alpha plus minus alpha, or alpha minus alpha over square root 2. And if you try to represent the state in phase space using the Wigner distribution, you indeed notice two blobs on alpha and minus alpha. And the way you see that those states are not simply a mixture of classical states is because you have the appearance of negativities in the Wigner function. And that's exactly how we are going to define our qubit. So we will say that the state alpha is the state 0 of our qubit. State minus alpha is state 1. And the cat states are the superpositions of the qubit. So for instance, in the block field, the cat states are located on the equator. And as any qubit, the cat qubit can have two kinds of errors. So there are first the bit flip error that swap the state 0 and 1, and a phase flip error, which are truly a quantum mechanical errors that swap the phase of the coherent superposition. That is, it swaps the state minus and plus. And now what I'm going to show you is that by carefully engineering the interaction of the cat qubit with its environment, we can very simply kill exponentially the bit flip errors. And so we are left only with phase flip errors that we will correct using a regular quantum error correction. So, okay, first, how can we use dissipation? Dissipation is always seen as something very bad in quantum mechanics because it engineers decoherence and so on. And I'm saying that we can actually use dissipation to stabilize our qubit. So first, okay, how can we do that? First, I'd like to mention that there is actually a very straightforward example where dissipation can help stabilization. It's the case where you take your pendulum and you drive it at resonance. So if you do that, you are putting energy in your pendulum, so it will start to oscillate, and the amplitude of the oscillation will grow over time. But if there would be no dissipation, the amplitude would just diverge. But if you have a small source of dissipation, at some point, the energy you inject in the pendulum with your drive will be compensated by the energy that leaks in the dissipator. And so, just driving your pendulum in presence of some dissipation will stabilize a coherent state. And this coherent state is really a quantum mechanical state that has a purity equal to 1. So it's really a perfectly valid quantum state. So indeed, dissipation can help to stabilize something in quantum mechanics. Now, this example is not very useful because if you want a qubit, you want to stabilize 2 states, not only 1. So here it's not, we cannot do a lot with that. But actually, there is a very simple solution to stabilize both states, at least from the theoretical point of view. You just need to change really the interaction of the pendulum with its environment so that the harmonic oscillator, so now I will speak about harmonic oscillator and not just pendulum. So you really change the interaction so that the harmonic oscillator will not exchange energy with the environment by exchanging photons one by one, as you can see on the Hamiltonian, where the operators are A and A dag, or the Lindbladian, which is also A. But you engineer it so that the exchange of energy in between the harmonic oscillator and its environment is such that photons are exchanged by pairs. And so formally, it just means that in the Hamiltonian, you replace A and A dag by A2 and A dag square. And the same goes for the Lindblad operator. And if you do that, it happens that you don't stabilize only the state alpha, but you also stabilize the state minus alpha, which has an opposite phase. And so all the thing is to be able to engineer this kind of interaction in between the harmonic oscillator and its environment. But before showing you how we can engineer it, maybe I can be a bit more precise on how we can how this interaction stabilize 2 states. In fact, there is a simple physical picture. So the 2 photon interaction realize effectively a kind of a double well potential in phase space. And this double well potential has a minimum located around alpha and an other minimum located around minus alpha. And also there is some friction. So imagine that you prepared your qubit in the state alpha. So it's the state 0 of the qubit. And now imagine that there is some noise process that would give a little kick to your qubit. So the kick will just move slightly from the position alpha. And normally it would be a problem because it means that you are changing the state of the qubit. But thanks to this double well potential and the dissipation, the qubit will be autonomously brought back to the state alpha. And so the only way to have a bit flip, so a bit flip is swapping the state 0 and 1. So it means that your harmonic oscillator must jump from this well to this one. So the only way that this happens is that the kick produced by the noise process is so strong that the harmonic oscillator climbs up all the way to the saddle point, then pass by it and ends up in the other way. And of course, as you can easily imagine, the further apart are the well, the less probable it will be. And in fact, you can demonstrate that the suppression of bit flip increase exponentially with the distance in between the state alpha and minus alpha. And this is actually, this is simple to understand. It's reminiscent from the fact that the wave function of the harmonic oscillator in the potential well are Gaussian, and the overlap in between two Gaussian decays exponentially with the distance in between them. And therefore, by engineering this two photon dissipation, we have an exponential reduction of bit flip in the Schrödinger cat. Unfortunate, so it's really a nice result because it's an error correction that is extremely, it's autonomous. It's extremely simple to implement if you are able to engineer the two photon dissipation. The sad thing is that the phase flip, however, is not improved by two photon dissipation, and the reason is that phase flip swap the state alpha plus minus alpha and alpha minus minus alpha, and those states are delocalized in phase space. So it means that a noise process, even if it's local in phase space, it actually doesn't matter. The state plus and minus overlap each other, and therefore the noise process can induce a phase flip. However, a really important result is that the two photon dissipation does not make the phase flip worse. It simply let it as it is. And if I go more into details, we would see that by increasing the distance in between the two blobs, so that is increasing the size of the cat, the phase flip will increase linearly, but this has nothing to do with two photon dissipation. It's just a basic property of the quantum harmonic oscillator. So here that's a master equation simulation that demonstrates this behavior. So basically, I'm plotting on the left the phase flip rate, and on the right the bit flip rate as a function of the size of the cat. So really the distance in between the blobs alpha and minus alpha. And and the different curve correspond to different, let's say, a physical error rate of the harmonic oscillator. And as you can notice, the phase flip rate indeed increased linearly with the size of the cat, but the bit flip rate is decreased exponentially. And so here you clearly it's extremely favorable because a linear evolution is basically negligible compared to an exponential evolution. So the price to pay by increasing linearly the phase flip rate is really nothing compared to what you win by killing exponentially the bit flip rate. Okay, so sorry. So now we try to explain you how we can engineer this special interaction where the harmonic oscillator exchange energy with its environment by pairs of photons. So in our case, the harmonic oscillator is not a pendulum. It's a superconducting resonator, which you can model as an LC circuit. And there is a very simple way to bring dissipation and to drive an LC circuit. It's to couple it to a resistor for dissipation and to an AC current source for driving. Unfortunately, if you do that, the exchange of energy in between the resonator and the environment will only happen photon one by one. And so the solution we found is to actually put a buffer in between the harmonic oscillator and its environment. And this buffer is a nonlinear resonator that we will pump parametrically at a frequency equal to twice the frequency of the harmonic oscillator minus the frequency of the buffer. And in this way, we engineer an interaction that will allow to convert two photons in the resonator into one photon in the buffer, or inversely, take one photon in the buffer and convert it into two photons in the resonator. And if you manage to, I will show you how we do that, but if you manage to have this kind of interaction, then it's very simple to make, for instance, a 2-photon drive of the harmonic oscillator. You will simply apply a 1-photon drive on the buffer and then rely on the nonlinearity and the parametric pumping of the buffer to convert this 1-photon drive on to a 2-photon drive of the harmonic oscillator. And the same goes for dissipation. Let's say that your harmonic oscillator has some photons into it. The nonlinearity and the parametric pumping of the buffer can convert 2 photons of the harmonic oscillator into 1 photon on the buffer. And now, since this buffer is connected to some resistor, the photon inside the buffer will just be dissipated away. And so effectively, you are engineering a 2-photon loss operator for your harmonic oscillator. And so now all the thing is to be able to realize this 4-wave mixing process. And we do that by using a superconducting squid. So the squid is a superconducting loop that is interrupted by 2 junctions. And the potential energy of this circuit is highly nonlinear. It is basically a cosine of the superconducting phase. So with this, we could make the kind of 2-photon dissipation I was discussing. But actually, this potential energy has other problems. So squids are very sensitive to flux noise, and they also induce spurious terms that are Kerr-like terms. So we change a little bit this circuit by short-circuiting it with a linear inductor. And if you phase bias this new circuit element that we call the ATS, if you phase bias it asymmetrically, by putting a superconducting phase 0 in the left loop and a superconducting phase pi in the right loop, then you engineer another kind of potential energy that has a sin phi and not a cos phi, and which is much more resilient to spurious terms. And I won't go into detail, but basically, if you expand the sin phi, you can see that you engineer an Hamiltonian that has precisely this shape. So this shape is A dagger square B plus A square B dagger. And you can see that this term takes either it would remove 1 photon in the buffer and create 2 photons in the harmonic oscillator, or it would take 2 photons from the harmonic oscillator and convert it into 1 photon in the buffer. And so by using this circuit element, we can indeed engineer this special kind of interaction in between the harmonic oscillator and its environment. In practice, it looks like that. So for the harmonic oscillator is a lambda over 2 resonator. So everything is made in superconducting material. The buffer is here, and if I provide a zoom, it looks like this. So you can indeed see the loop, which is interrupted by 2 Josephson junctions, and there is a chain of other Josephson junctions here, which behave as a linear inductor. Then we have different lines that allow to pump the buffer asymmetrically, and the buffer is also connected to this line, which in the end is connected to a transmission line, which will behave as a dissipative environment. Basically, it will behave as a 50 ohm resistor. And just by pumping this buffer, we can engineer a 2-photon loss for the cat qubit. And the rest of the circuit is a regular Transmon qubit plus another lambda over 2 resonator. And this is actually just the Transmon and the readout here are just there to be able to read the state of the cat qubit. And now I can show you the experimental result that appeared last year in Nature Physics. So it's really the final result. It's a measurement of the phase flip of the cat qubit as a function of the size of the cat qubit. So that is the number of photons in the harmonic oscillator. And you see that indeed it's increasing linearly as expected. And on the right, You can see a measurement of the average time in between 2-bit flip as a function of the size of the cat. And indeed, this guy is increasing exponentially. And the improvement of the lifetime of the cat qubit was 300. At some point, it's saturated, but it's something we understood, and now we are working on pushing this limit much higher. And yeah, so that was really the main result, which demonstrated that indeed the Schrödinger cat qubit is able to actually implement error correction autonomously just by a smart engineering of the interaction in between the cat qubit and its environment. So yeah, so that's the first thing. And so this part of error correction works, but now if we want to make a quantum computer, we also need to kill phase flip errors, because obviously we cannot do much with a quantum computer that has maybe no bit flip, but a lot of phase flip. And for this, we are going to use regular quantum error correction scheme. However, the important thing is that since bit flip are already killed by in the Schrödinger cat qubit, correcting for phase flip will be actually much more easier in terms of hardware. So okay, so quantum error correction. So the general idea of quantum error correction is that, okay, we have a physical qubit. We know those physical qubits make errors. We cannot do much against it. You know, they will always make errors. Maybe we can gain 1 or 2 orders of magnitude on the error rate, but anyway, it won't be enough. And so the idea is that we are going to encode quantum information not in a single physical qubit, but in an ensemble of physical qubits. And the principle is if the error rate of your physical qubit is not too large, if it's below some threshold, mainly it means that you don't have several physical qubits that will make many errors simultaneously. Then what you can do is that you can measure a syndrome on your ensemble of physical qubits. Basically, you compare the state of different physical qubits in your ensemble. And like that, you can detect if a qubit, a physical qubit, made an error. And if you are, and this is very important, because if you can say that this particular qubit just made an error, you can correct it. And if you keep doing syndrome measurement and error correction of the physical qubit, it's true that you have errors, it's like that, but the quantum information, which is carried by the ensemble of physical qubits, won't make errors because you are constantly correcting the physical errors. So there are several different kinds of quantum error correction protocol. The most well-known one is surface code, but for in this talk, I will rather talk about the Bacon-Shor code because, as you will see, it's much closer to the spirit of error correction with cat qubit. So the Bacon-Shor code starts in this way. So the blue dot here, each blue dot represents a physical qubit. For instance, for the moment, we don't care whether it is an ion, a cat qubit, a transmon, or anything else. And the first thing you do is to create a chain of those qubits, and you will measure syndrome on this chain that will be able to detect if a bit flip happened on one of those qubits. And when you see that a bit flip happened, you correct it by doing a gate on the qubit that made an error. And what you can show is that by doing this, you can suppress exponentially the bit flip rate of the line. And the price that you pay is that the phase flip rate increase linearly. So probably it reminds you of something about cat qubit. And exactly like cat qubit, the next step is to correct exponentially the phase flip rate. Maybe I should say that the exponential decrease of the bit flip rate evolve with the number of physical qubits in the chain. And now if you want to correct for the phase flip rate, what you do is a line of lines, of qubit lines, and you measure error syndrome on the big lines, but you now measure error syndrome that detect phase flip errors. And when you notice a phase flip, you correct it. And if you do it like that, you will suppress exponentially the phase flip errors. So in the meantime, you also increase linearly the bit flip error, but in the end, it doesn't really matter because the exponential term will always win against the linear term. There is just one technical subtlety I should mention here is that the Bacon shortcode compared to the surface code does not have a real threshold, which means that you cannot increase indefinitely the dx and dz to reduce the error rate to 0 because the concatenated repetition code only works if the phase flip rate multiplied by the length of qubits in the small lines is below the threshold. And of course, if you increase dx, then pz times dx will go above threshold, and it means that the concatenated repetition code won't work anymore. But in practice, it doesn't really matter, because if you take a realistic error rate, you can show that there is an optimum where you can reach logical error rates that are completely negligible for all the applications that people envision for quantum computing. So this is a Bacon shortcode, and now the error correction of cat qubits, as you will see, is very similar. In fact, it's exactly the same spirit, except that we get rid of one layer of error correction, because one cat qubit is already correcting exponentially for bit flip errors. So to make a correction of phase flip error, we will just make one line of cat qubit and apply a repetition code on it to detect phase flip and correct them. And here you see that the cat qubit is really hardware efficient, because if you take a regular Bacon shortcode, the number of physical qubits that you need to make a logical qubit is equal to dx times dz. Now, if you put typically dx and dz would be of the order of 30, so it means that you need of the order of 1000 physical qubits to just make one logical qubit. But with the cat qubit, since you need to make only one dimension of repetition code, it means that with only 30 physical qubits, you can make a logical qubit. And of course, it simplifies things really by a lot, because you don't need 1000 microwave source, but only 30 of them. You don't need to wire in your dilution refrigerator. You don't need to bring down 1000 microwave lines with all the interconnect on chip and so on. All the numbers are reduced to only something of the order of 30. And doing this, we can indeed suppress, with only this small number of qubits, we can suppress to a very low value a bit flip and phase flip. And I can be more precise regarding this value. So, so these are master equation simulation of the logical error rate of a repetition code of cat qubit. So the graph is a bit difficult to read, but essentially what you see is you have three curves. So each curve corresponds to a target for the logical error rate. So 10 to the -5, 10 to the -7, and 10 to the -10. And each curve shows the number of cat qubits you must put in your repetition code as a function of the physical error probability to reach the logical error rate. And if you look at if you try to put realistic numbers, so typically the physical error probability would be of the order of 10 to the -3. And in this case, you see that you can reach a logical error of 10 to the -10 with only 60 cat qubits and a size of 15 photons in the harmonic oscillator. So these are really realistic numbers that in principle could be done in a really near-term experiment, and that would not require any the development of any new hardware or nanofabrication technique and so on, really using all the existing tools of a superconducting circuit. This is in principle, this is doable. And yeah, okay, so that's really the principle of error correction with cat qubit. Now, maybe to finish, I can say a few words on how we perform gate on cat qubit, because there's actually something quite funny about it. And it is related to the fact that cat qubits have a really special sensitivity to errors. You know, they are really biased, because basically they have no bit flip, but they have a regular number of phase flips. So there are much more phase flips than bit flip. And it means that if you want to make a gate on your cat qubit to make the error correction or to run an algorithm, it's absolutely instrumental that the gate preserve this bias. And actually, if you do the gate normally, it won't be the case. You can show that on a very simple example. Let's say you want to perform an X gate. That is, you want to swap the state 0 and 1. So the usual way to do it is to perform a Rabi oscillation. More precisely, you would perform a pi rotation. So that would take the qubit in state 0 and make it rotate in the Bloch sphere until it reaches the state 1. However, imagine that so bit flip are suppressed, but let's imagine that a phase flip occurs during this gate. In this case, your qubit state will be bring to the other side of the Bloch sphere, and while you continue the gate, instead of going to state 1, actually you will go back to state 0. And so it means that if you have a phase flip error that occurs during the X gate, it amounts to a bit flip error. And so this is really a huge problem, because you have fought very hard to kill bit flip errors, but during your gate, your bit flip error rate is equal to the phase flip error rate. But fortunately, there is a solution for this, which exploit another nice feature of cat qubit. So the cat qubit is a qubit, so it has only two states, but 0 state alpha and minus alpha. But in reality, the cat qubit is hosted by a harmonic oscillator, and the harmonic oscillator has an infinite number of states. And so what you can do is that you can try to use the bigger Hilbert space of the harmonic oscillator to make this gate. And in practice, for the X gate, what we are going to do is not a rotation, a Rabi oscillation in the Bloch sphere. We are going to go out of the code space by going using other state of the quantum harmonic oscillator and find a way that is preserves the bias, and that will end up in the state alpha. In practice, it's quite easy actually to understand. So an X gate would take the state alpha and bring it to minus alpha, or inversely, it would take a minus alpha and bring it to alpha. And well, if you want to do that, it's very simple. You just change the phase of the state that is stabilized, and you make it slowly rotate over time. And if you do this adiabatically, your state alpha will just rotate, and you stop the rotation when you reach the state minus alpha. So it looks very simple, and it's very simple, but it allows, since you always have your two-photon dissipation that is on, you indeed have a gate that is bias preserving, and that would not be possible with a regular two-level system, because you don't have all those intermediate states that we are using with the cat qubit. And to finish, very briefly, I'd like to tell you that our theorist could indeed find quite a number of gates that are bias preserving at the physical level, and they demonstrated that using those gates, they are able to perform logical gates which are fault tolerant, and they found a nice construction to make the Toffoli and the Hadamard gate. And the thing is that if you have the Toffoli and the Hadamard gate, you have a universal set of quantum gate, and therefore our cat qubits are not only perform error correction, but they are also able. We have a universal set of gates, so we can also run any algorithm. And with this, I would like to thank you.
All right, thank you, Sebastian. We are now opening up to questions, so we can take any questions from the audience. You don't have to raise your hand. Yeah, we just shout out our questions. Rupesh, go ahead. I mean, it's a discussion, so anything that comes to your mind, you can just shout.
Okay, great. I was just wondering, so Sebastian, that's a fantastic presentation. Really loved it. What I've heard Amazon are also interested in CAD qubits as well. And what are your thoughts about this? About what kind of sort of a competition you have in this space?
Yeah, so at the beginning we were a bit. It was a lot of stress because indeed they really took our idea of the CAD qubit to make their quantum computer. But on the other hand, we were very excited because until Amazon decided to try to make a quantum computer with CAD qubit, we are the only one doing it. So somehow it was really nice to see that people like John Preskill validated the CAD qubit approach by saying that indeed it can work. Now, if I say more things on the Amazon approach, so of course the only thing I know is what they're published. So they published a blueprint last December. So basically, from the theory side, it's exactly our approach. It's the same kind of gate and error correction and algorithm and so on. The only thing is that they want to do it with another physical system. And so as I explained, in our case, we use a superconducting resonator, but apparently they want to do it with a nanomechanical resonator, which is a perfectly valid choice because nanomechanical resonators are very compact, and although they have very long lifetime. So currently the problem is that the coupling of a nanomechanical resonator with an ATS seems quite difficult to do, but I guess they are going to work on this. And yeah, so basically it's really the same approach, maybe just with a different physical system.
Okay, that's great. If I may, can I ask you one more question, which is, I've read Honeywell and others working on a logical, creating a logical qubit. Have you created a logical qubit yet?
So okay, we have already demonstrated the suppression of bit flip. And now if we really want to make a logical qubit, we need to suppress phase flip. And this is basically what we are working on. So that exactly the reason why the startup Alice and Bob was created. It's because it's easy to make first demonstration that you can suppress bit flip. Now, if you want to really make error correction with a repetition code, you need much more hardware, you need much more money, you need a bigger team, and basically this cannot be done in an academic lab. So that's really the first milestone that Alice and Bob want to reach is to we already know how to kill bit flip errors. Now we want to kill next 1 or 2 years. But regarding Honeywell, I think yeah. So they claim they made a logical qubit, but I think yeah, maybe it's yeah. I'm not an expert of their technology, but apparently they did not publish all the data, and also actually a logical qubit does not really mean a lot. It's because okay, you want to suppress the error rate, and hopefully you can do that exponentially. Now, what is the error rate that you can tolerate? It really depends on application, because you don't really need an error rate of 0. You can live with errors. Classical computer live with errors. So so it's different to demonstrate that you can indeed decrease exponentially the error rate. It's different than reaching the level of error that is small enough so that you can run a useful algorithm. And I think currently no one is already there. And well, that's really the milestone that everyone is trying to reach.
Yeah, thank you. What I'm really excited by, I agree with you. I think it's difficult to tell marketing from reality. And but what I agree with you on is what I'm excited by is just how few CAD qubits you need to create a logical qubit. So this is potentially very exciting indeed. So thank you very much.
We have a question from Avi. Question is, we see here a concept. Do we also have a proof of concept? Can we see a proof of concept? I think you partly explained that, but I want to.
Yeah. So the proof of concept for exponential suppression of bit flip is this curve. Oh, sorry. Yeah, so it's this curve. Indeed, here we demonstrate exponential suppression of bit flip errors. And as I just said during the previous question, demonstrating that we can also kill phase flip error exponentially is a milestone we are working on currently.
Okay.
I think Kieran you can go.
Yeah. Hi. Am I audible?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Yeah. So you explained the concept of bit flip, actually, like where there's exponential, like some reduction of bit flips. Can you please briefly explain that? First question. And secondly, CAD qubits, is there any major advantage apart from reducing the error rate per operation? I mean, as you mentioned, is like in the coming future, apart from qubits, if we use CAD qubits, what more can we see actually?
Yeah. So the first question was if I can give you an explanation of what are bit flip.
Yeah.
So let me back to the block sphere. So in quantum mechanics, you have two kind of errors. Unlike so bit flip are basically the equivalent of a classical error. It's really you prepare your qubit or your classical bit in, for say, state 1, and for some reason, because there is some noise or there is some dissipation or something like that, your qubit will flip to the other state, 0. And so that's a bit flip error. And so bit flip error also happen for classical systems. And what is truly quantum is the phase flip error. Phase flip error where you have a superposition. Let's say you're in state plus, so 0 plus 1 over square root of 2. And here you don't exchange 0 and 1, but you change the phase of the superposition. That is, you switch from 0 plus 1 over square root of 2 to 0 minus 1 over square root of 2. And so phase flip are really a quantum mechanical error.
Okay, yeah, thanks. And about CAD qubits, like if you can just mention something.
Yeah, sorry, what was your second question?
Yeah, so like a second question was, is there any major advantage, like, for CAD qubits apart from or like when we use CAD qubits and the gates, like you mentioned the last slide, I guess, second last
yeah.
slide.
So actually, there is a, let me go to the last slide. So there is one big advantage and one drawback. So the big advantage is that, with just the chain of physical CAD qubit, you already have a universal set. CAD qubit plus a repetition code, you already have a universal set of logical gates. And this contrasts with the surface code, for instance, where you don't have a universal set of gates with a surface code, and you need to do things like Magistech distillation or things like that, which increase again the hardware overhead. So really one nice thing with CAD qubit is that we have naturally this universal set of gates. Now the issue is that so you can see some parallel bars here, which show which kind of gate are transversal. And some of them, the Toffoli is not. So it means that currently we need an all-to-all connectivity for the Toffoli. And but our theorists are working on that, and they have actually there are ways around it, but anyway, it's unlike the surface code has naturally only transversal gates, but it's not the case with CAD qubits.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
If you have a question, you can just like unmute yourself and You don't have to like take a turn. Ask it.
Can I go?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
Thank you. My name's Ravi. I'm asking about readout and how do you implement this? I'm sure you have kind of readout pulses that you have in that diagram you showed in the implementation diagram. So what kind of physical parameters that you have, any numbers or graphs or your experience, or even to extend what kind of gates are really, because you said cat qubits, some gates are really bias preserving. Do you have any, what is your experience for Huawei's readout in this scheme of thing, cat qubit scheme? Thank you.
Yeah, so the readout we use a Trendsman to measure the state of the cat qubit, and basically, so there are different options depending on whether you want to measure sigma X or sigma Z, but essentially, what the spirit is that you will use this Trendsman to measure either the number of photons in the cat qubit or the parity of the number of photons in the cat qubit. And for this, actually, we use really a regular technique in superconducting circuits. So the Trendsman is coupled dispersively to the cat qubit, and it means that the frequency of the Trendsman depends on the number of photons in the cat qubit. And it's actually these properties that we will use. For instance, if we want to know the parity of the cat qubit, we will make an experiment that will use the fact that photons with a given parity induce Trendsman frequency, which is different from the case where there is an even number of photons in the cat qubit. So, and then the Trendsman readout is again done with a regular circuit QED technique. So again, we use a dispersive interaction, and we basically measure the frequency of the readout, and the frequency of the readout depends on the state of the Trendsman. But then it's really, for instance, for the, I don't know how familiar you are with it, but to measure the parity of the cat qubit, we would make basically a Ramsey experiment on the Trendsman.
Any gate? So you say the bias preserving some gates are from the fault tolerance versus the fault tolerance. That some gates are better in that sense. So do you have any experience with readouts in the cat qubit scheme that these bias preserving gates really explore the parity that you look at the forums?
So well, actually, so the set of bias preserving gates are here in the gray square here. We did not test all of them currently because it was not really needed. Some of them are completely trivial, like the X gate, as I've shown before. So measurement preparation is okay. And actually, currently, the one we are working heavily on is the CNOT gate, because it's the gate that is necessary to implement the repetition cat code. So so now the big step is really to demonstrate a bias preserving CNOT.
Thanks.
Yeah, so I have a question about scaling. So you talked about the exponential reduction of bit Phillips, and then the linear increase of the phase Phillips due to that. Right now, we only, have NISQ devices and like pedagogical problems. So we can only work with kind of like toy systems. At what scale does this exponential reduction dominate the linear increase? Because when we're working with like at ion traps, we're working with like 5 to 10 qubits at most, maybe like a few more when we talk about superconducting qubits. At what scale does this exponential dominate? Because you have a constant factor as well at the linear. So I just wanted to ask about that.
Yeah. So yeah, again, sorry. So it really depends actually what is your target for logical errors. So if you have an algorithm that can tolerate 10 to the minus 5 logical error rate, you won't need to apply such a you will be able to live with a smaller repetition code that will so that will be easier to do. Now, if you want, for instance, if you are very ambitious and you want to break the RSA protocol, you need much lower error rate. Then, in this case, you need to really suppress a lot the errors. But yeah, it really depends on the target logical state. But yeah.
So that'll be around 60. Is that what you're?
Yeah. So yeah, the order of magnitude is a few tens of cat qubit to make a logical qubit.
Okay, and then great, thanks. And then we have the other way, right? Then there's the optimal point of 173 qubits, right? And then after that, the connected repetition codes become less optimal, right? Is that like the optimal point? And after that point,
yeah, exactly. That was for the Bacon shortcode, so not so that was not cat qubit, really two-level systems. And it did. They found that for a physical error rate of 10 to the minus 3, there was this optimum reaching 10 to the minus 28 logical error. But clearly, 10 to the minus 28 is overkill. No one needs that.
Yeah, exactly.
Break RSA key.
Yeah, it would be interesting to see the optimal points for 10 to the negative 10. But I guess 173 cat qubits would be a lot.
Basically, what it means is that okay, if you can reach 10 to the minus 28 for 173 distance, well, you just need to reduce this 173, and naturally this number will increase.
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I cannot tell exactly for the Bacon shortcode currently. I think in the end, if you really have two-level system, you should rather use the surface code because it's easier. But only thing I can tell is that for if you want to do the repetition code with cat qubit, it's this kind of numbers that matter. And yeah, for instance, if the error you want is that your target is 10 to the minus 5, let's say, and you have a physical error rate of 10 to the minus 3, you see you only need 25 cat qubit in your repetition.
Yeah, really cool. Yeah, amazing. Yeah, that was my question. Do we have any more questions?
I have a question. I got a bit of my concepts confused, but could you go back to the slide with the potential wells and the bit flip slide? Yeah. No, I think it was it was the next one. Yeah. Okay. So if I remember correctly, you have your qubit, and if you put them, in either side of the potential wells, you want to increase the distance between the potential wells so that and that'll result in an exponential reduction of bit flips, right? Yeah. So I think I've gotten this. I think I'm a bit confused with other stuff, but I mean, I've read a lot about, and I've heard, of course, a lot about quantum tunneling and how you can have qubits that can pass through the potential barrier. So if you increase the distance between these two potential wells, it seems like, I mean, at least in all the diagrams they show, the qubit that passes through from one side of the well to the other without crossing over the barrier. And so in that sense, it looks like that'll just be a linear decrease in linear reduction in bit flips. Can you sort of explain that thing to me? I think I'm a bit confused there.
Yeah, actually, so it's indeed related to that. So okay, let's say that the noise process are really small enough so that the qubit state is really stabilized in the minimum of the potential rate. You know, I exclude the fact that I have a really huge noise process that would just kick my particle above the saddle point. So if it's not the case, then my qubit is a Gaussian wave function centered around the minimum.
Yeah.
Either this minimum or this minimum. And then you're completely right. You can indeed have a quantum tunneling in between those two states. And the quantity you have to look at to estimate this quantum tunneling is really the overlap in between the wave functions. And since those wave functions are Gaussian, you can easily calculate the overlap in between two Gaussians that are separated by a distance 2 alpha, and you will see that the overlap decreases exponentially with alpha. And,
okay.
And it's just it's easy to see. You know, the Gaussian is an exponential decay.
Yeah, it looks like that actually. It looks like yeah.
And so you're completely right that in the end, even if there were the harmonic oscillator had no physical error rate, there would be quantum tunneling that could induce bit flip, but this quantum tunneling is suppressed exponentially.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, great questions. If there aren't any more questions, we can wrap up. Maybe we can take one more question if anyone has. It's a lot of pressure to ask questions, so ask those questions. Oh, Ravi, I guess you unmuted yourself.
Sorry, I'm having the last word.
No, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. It's about applications. Obviously, since you have cat qubits, would you see quantum chemistry as a natural killer application for cat qubits? Error suppression is high, as you say, and the numbers do seem to show some kind of resilience, versus now we see problems in, simulating or developing quantum materials in the IBM type. And I'm sorry if anybody's from IBM, in the other superconducting scheme. So would you say this would be a better way to do quantum chemistry, just as a wrap or something like that? Was your insight or experience or any industry exposure? Thank you.
Yeah. So we did not try to really try to find which algorithm are better with cat qubit. But the thing I can tell is that there are class of problems that get more and more difficult, whatever the kind of qubit you are using. And indeed, all the problems that fall in the class of quantum simulations, whether it's quantum chemistry or simulation of quantum material and so on, is probably what is the easiest for quantum computer. It's what is more tolerant to errors. So that will probably be the first real life application, and it obviously has a huge benefit. And then really a purely algorithmic problem, like for instance, breaking RSA, the RSA protocol is like the most challenging things. And so, yeah, I agree with you. Probably really quantum simulations of molecules or material will be the first real life application.
Thank you.
Okay. Thank you everyone for coming. Thanks, Sebastian, for this amazing talk. Alexi, do you have any closing remarks, or should we go ahead and?
Just want to thank again everyone, and it's really great to see the whole world coming together. So if you guys haven't spoken yet, please submit a talk, and obviously we'll be watching for progress of all our speakers in the company, as Elsmob really is a cool startup, as we've seen. So yeah, I mean, you guys don't hesitate to come with updates. I know the Cambridge Quantum had some interesting news, so maybe then you want to give us an update at one of the next conversations, right? With all the quantum NLP and stuff like that. I think there's really developments are coming up. So please,
yes,
think of doing return talks, updates. Maybe somebody can review the progress in the field, right? It doesn't have to be your work directly, right? Also, all kinds of contributions are welcome.
Exactly. I mean, the contributions to the field are exponentially increasing. We see new technologies every day. We see new papers, new applications coming out, especially in quantum machine learning. A lot of stuff has been developed. There's a lot of stuff in quantum Monte Carlo since the last time we spoke. A lot of developments in that area. So we might focus on one of those topics maybe next month. As you all know, we meet every Wednesday or every last Wednesday of every month. Qiskit Summer School was held the last 2 weeks. I don't know if anyone participated in that. It was focused on quantum machine learning and it had over 5,000 participants. So people are definitely getting more and more interested in the field. So we will keep on meeting and talking about these topics. Thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for the invitation.
Thank you.